Okay, so I am so excited about our guest today. So this is such an inspiring and I think super creative and sometimes unexpected path, and so many different hats you're actually wearing. I just name drop some of the titles from your wiki page. So small titles like Star Wars Outlaws, Beyond Good and Evil, oh Mario Rabbids, Battlefield, Star Wars Battlefront. So this was just like the latest few. The list goes on and on and on. What was also super deserved among several of the prizes you got was also the 2024. Congrats again, the game at the GDC Game Developers Choice Ambassador Award, which was also
Thank you so much.
super important. I think very well deserved. So yeah, I could not even know where to start or to end, how to introduce you. But what I also really appreciate is that next to your game development hats and you have a podcast, you speak at all the events, but you're also an author. You just published a book, another book, about creativity. I hope we can also talk a little bit about that. But yeah, thanks so much for being part of this. I'll give the stage to you.
Well, Joey, thank you for having me. That's what a humbling introduction. Thank you so much. It's so good to be here. And yeah, what a humbling introduction. Thank you for having me. And yeah, the book is just out. Another one.
Another one.
Another one. Why do I keep doing this to myself? Is what I'm thinking.
Oh, no. This is the wrong start. So this should be super inspiring and motivating, and I'm just
Sorry.
telling us
Oh
how easy it is for you, of course, to do all those things.
yeah. It's always easy to when you see like you see the tip of the iceberg, right? Like you see like the things that comes out, or like the games that come out or the book that come out, but there's all these nights of me thinking to myself, why did I do this to myself? I could
Again.
be sleeping now, or maybe just watching a movie.
Yeah, but this is gonna be this episode about to talk about how you like juggle all those things, learn a little bit about your path, how you became this person with those many hats, and obviously like it's something like how I got to know you, which like this personality that you're doing so many things and that you're so much into wearing those different hats, working always on different projects. This is something which is obviously super like again like from the outside perspective how I got to know you, something which
Yeah.
is really forming you as a person, which is like driving you. This is like the outside perspective, and this is like what I would love to talk and learn more about today, how you got
Happy
there.
to do so. Like life is too short, and there's so many things in the world to see and explore. So I'm always curious. I guess this is why I always like oh, this is interesting. This is interesting. I like to like try out things. I've always done that. Ever since I was a kid, I've always wanted to do a million things.
Let's directly start there. Perfect starting point. You as a kid, give us your journey.
Yeah, so as a kid, like I think like I was mentioning, I tend to kind of like to get obsessed with a bunch of different things, like all the times. And I remember my dad was always confused about me. He was like, unlike my other siblings who would ask for one toy once a year, I was always asking for things. I was like, can I get the music instrument? Can I get a toy? Can I get this pad so I can draw? I used to like sneak and use my dad's computer to write stories about my toys and how they interact with each other and stuff like that. And my dad was always like he was used to tell me like as a kid he struggled to understand what are the things that I actually wanted and what are the things that a kid would just say like, yeah, I want this, like just get attracted by a color or something like that. And I've always been like this, like I've always get like obsessed with a lot of different things. And I guess my obsession with video games started when my dad bought us an Atari 2600. That was my
Ah,
first console, and that thing came with Space Invaders
yeah.
and Hangman and Yar's Revenge. These are the three games that I remember, and I was completely infatuated by it. I could not stop playing. Space Invaders is my first video game,
Oh,
and since then I was like completely infatuated. So I just playing games the whole time, always asking for game consoles and stuff like that. And I think also because I was so infatuated with games, I also knew that I wanted my life to be involved in making video games. So I think when I was in kindergarten, they used to ask us, "What do you want to do when you grew up?" And my parents are hoarders; they don't throw away anything. So we still have that piece of paper that basically said, "I want to make games in Japan." Is the thing that I wanted to do. Like all
no
the kids
way.
want, they wanted to be pilots or firemen or something like this, and I was like, I want to make games in Japan. That was the childhood dream, basically.
This is great because like this is actually this is so rare that you know like when you're so young. Like I could have never imagined when I was a little girl what I will be, that I will become this game professor. I didn't even know that like things like these exist. And this is so interesting that I read that you were so specific. You didn't want to become a game developer, but a game developer in Japan.
Well, you know, like back then when I was growing up, Japan was this like magical place where all the cool stuff come from. You know, like my dad drove a Toyota, we had a Toshiba TV, I had a Nintendo and an MSX before that, which was also Japanese console. So it's like this magical place where all the cartoons we watched as kids were dubbed anime in the Middle East. So like Captain Tsubasa and Rosa Versailles and that kind of stuff. So I'm like, what is this magical place where all the cool stuff was coming from? So in my mind, for a long period of time, I just thought that games are only made in Japan and that I need to make my way there so that I can make video games. And you're right. It's kind of something that I feel very lucky that I have had, is that ever since I was a kid, I kind of knew what I wanted. And that gave me like this compass in life, you know, like whatever something that comes up my way, I can see like, does it help me make video games? Does it help me go to Japan? No, then I'm not interested, and I move on to the other things. So like a lot of life decisions I ended up making. You know, like even university, when it was time to study university, I was like, if I'm gonna make games, I probably need to study computers because they make games on computers. So I did that. You know, I studied computer science because I thought that would probably help me
Did it
make video
help?
games. It definitely did, you know. Like, yeah, my first game is something I did with a bunch of other computer science students. And we wanted to make a Game Boy Advance game back in 2003. And yeah, we just started to make it. I remember we contacted Nintendo to ask them for a dev kit. And they were like so shocked because, like, for them, like, Jordan was not even on the distribution network for their console. So they were like, how do you even know about us? As was their questions. They started asking us all kind of questions because like they were curious of how we got to know what Nintendo is and how we play their games, let alone we
Did you
want to
get
make
it?
games.
Did you get the dev kit in the end?
No, so they told us we need to be a certified developers. And I don't think we knew what that even meant back then. And then they told us that we need to pick up our dev kits from our nearest distribution center, which was in London at the time. And I think the console cost was like in the thousands of euros, whereas like between all of us combined, we had a couple of hundred euros. So no, actually, we never really got the dev kits, but we did. The next logical thing is that between the eight of us, we had like three commercial units, and we just hacked them, and we made the game anyway, and we made a vertical slice on that thing, which is like probably one of the first games to be made in the region, like probably amongst the first. I don't know if it was the first or not.
This is
But yeah,
something which is like keep getting I keep hearing this, that especially this hacking scene, this is like how many people sort of started, like I don't know, yeah, a little bit reverse engineering the games, a little
yeah,
bit reprogramming them, hacking eventually the systems a little bit. So it's quite interesting that you're also mentioning this.
yeah, and I started like 20, 30 years after, like the pioneers, the people that
Yeah.
were like hacking chipsets and making games that are like a couple of kilobytes, or like using mainframe computers in their like physics labs to make a video game. But more or less, I think it was humble beginnings to some extent. Like the game that we made was around 2.5 megabytes, because that's what you could fit on a on a on a Game Boy Advance cartridge. Like I
Mm,
was doing the music and the sound effects for the game,
cool.
because I used to play music in bars and stuff, and like gigs around the country. And my friends like, "Oh, you like music and you're a programmer, so you should join our team and write music for this Game Boy Advance game." And
What
that's what I did.
what programming language was this back then? What did you have to? Was it C?
So it was, and but for my section, I ended up making like a mod tracker on Visual Basic, because like writing writing every note in code was gonna take a while,
Mhm.
and I also wanted to kind of like use the wave files that I took samples of. Like I want to loop them in code and then like fade them in and out, lower the volume, or because I only had 200 kilobytes as my budget for everything, and of course I wanted 140 instruments, because how else am I gonna do my art?
So good. So good. Um,
Yeah,
I already made the note about music. We need to talk about music. I think later on. But let's
I'd love
let's
to, because
let
you're a musician as well, right, Joey?
yes, 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 yes. But we have to talk about you and your exciting journey, because this is what is taking people to the career path to Ubi and Dice and what did I mention, and King. I forgot King earlier on.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I've done a bit of everything over the years.
so you had then you studied computer science. What's next?
I studied computer science, and I also was like, I probably need to go to Japan, because that's where they make video games. So I'm probably gonna need to learn Japanese. So we also did that. And me and a lot of the same guys that we made the first game with, they're also like weebs like myself.
Right. I forgot.
Yeah,
Of course, you have to learn Japanese, like especially like if you want to work there,
yeah.
you have to.
So I mean, like if you work in a Japanese company, yeah, not that many people speak, working proficient English. So you got to learn Japanese if you want to work for Japanese companies. So yeah, I ended up studying.
This is brilliant. So in kindergarten, you write down, okay, I want to become a game programmer in Japan, and then your life is about learning how to develop games and speak Japanese.
And get there.
That's
So we
amazing.
gotta make. I didn't know what the game programmer is. I just wanted to make games. It was a very broad term. And like I think when I was making this Game Boy Advance games with those guys, they liked my design ideas more than they liked my code. So they were like, maybe you should focus more on the design. Um, and that's what I ended up doing. It was game design through and through.
So this is already you in Japan, or what was the next step?
No, this was in Jordan, because
This was
I'm
in
originally from
Jordan.
Jordan.
Yes,
That's where
yes.
I started, and like so that's me and those guys. We did our first indie game together on the Game Boy Advance. It was a vertical slice. We never finished it because it was an RPG. Of course, we're making your first game, so it has to be a JRPG.
Of course. I
Uh,
mean, it can be an MMO with like a very unique story and an endless world, and like thousands of players, or it can be the easy ones, right?
we were like, we want to make an Arabic Chrono Trigger was the
Cool.
idea that we had. And, Game Boy Advance doesn't even have Arabic language support. So we started to put Arabic language in bitmap. And we created the language as a font inside of the Game Boy Advance cartridge. And we had like a whole thing, like a village in which you can walk around, you can talk to people, and you can have a turn-based combat. So we had like a full vertical slice of a Chrono Trigger-like game that takes place in the Jordanian desert close to Petra.
Yes. Super. This is like I can remember like also the Brazilian game dev scene started a little bit by hacking the games, not to actually actually the reverse engineering and the hacking was supposed to be because they wanted to introduce translations for the countrymates. And this is
Mhm.
something which I found super inspiring. And then they started making small adjustments and eventually building their own games on top of that.
I
S-
think they did the same in Poland, right? Like CD Projekt Red.
Oh,
That's what the name comes from, right? They used to like do Polish translations and later on dubs for pirated copies of games that they used to sell in the shop. And then like they did so much modding, they were like, oh, we can probably make a game, and they definitely can. They made a few that are like some of my favorite games. So yeah, there's a bit of that, you know. And in Sweden, there's also a big kind of a modding scene because I was kind of like encouraged by the government, and it invested in people that did like modding communities and people like would toy around with chipsets and stuff like that. And lots of the big companies in Sweden just come from that.
yeah. Yeah, the modding. This is sort of like how I grew up. Like, if you want to become part of the games industry, you have to sort of be seen by modding games, and because like the coolest modders will be sort of be very be visible in the forums. Nobody, I think, still knows forums. Yeah, over.
Yeah, it's kind of wild. Like I mean, like now it's probably commonplace when we like see buses on the side of the bus, you see like an ad for a video game or something like this. But video games for the longest of time was a hobbyist, kind of community that just exponentially grew year over year.
But
Like the
it's
first Doom or Wolfenstein, I forgot which one was a shareware. This is how they they distributed the game before they some of the early games they used to the developers would copy and send floppy disks to people across the United States. It was a it was a wild time.
but this is quite interesting that you're mentioning this, because like this is what I always like think about the games industry. For me, it's still if you go to the events, to the game development conferences, it always feels like meeting your friends all over, and again, and it feels like given the size of the industry, still a relatively small and close community. I don't know how is your take on that, but this is like how I feel. Actually, also a very positive feeling. Actually,
And inside of the game dev community, it's still now we are like mainstream entertainment revenues are skyrocketing across the world, but it still feels like everybody knows everybody to some extent. It's a much bigger industry and it's been growing year over year. But it's still a tight knit community. It still takes a lot for somebody to dedicate their lives to making video games, and it still requires to build some very specific skill sets. Um, that they end up being needed on specific projects, and people would know that this person is really good at racing games. So if you need a racing game, you probably need to get them over or something of the sort. So yeah, they still have like a community feel to it, which is really nice. But it's definitely been growing
yeah.
nonstop.
Back to your journey.
Yeah. So where were we? So yeah, so the Game Boy Advance game, we never ended up finishing it, and then I worked on a bunch of different gaming companies in Jordan.
Mhm.
So there was a dude that opened a company and hired all of us, the people that worked on the first Game Boy game, and they're like, there's the only people that know how to make video games, so they hired us, and then they hired people around us, and we ended up making a few games together. There was a dude that started a company that was doing comic books for local markets, and he hired me to start a gaming division in his company, and then we ended up writing comics together. So I did a bit of both. I made video games and I wrote comic books with this guy.
I
Wrote like nine
remember.
of them.
I forgot your comic maker too. I forgot this in the introduction.
It accidental, I've been reading comics my entire life, but like when I was hired with this guy, he was like, "Can you create a division so that you can make games for my comics?" And I'd be like, "Yeah, cool," because I really like those comics and they look really neat. And then as we got to know each other, he was like, "I need someone to help me with the writing," so I ended up co-authoring a whole bunch of comic books that were distributed widely across the Middle East because we were trying to create like heroes for the local kid, Arab kid. So yeah, I made 9 of those combined. They were like distributed for like 5 million copies, physical only. I don't even have all of the 9 anymore. I
Five
think I have
million
like 5 or 6
copies.
of those issues. Um,
Amazing.
but that was a fun time. A lot of the games we made together were also like amongst the first kind of social games of the era as well. Like we made games on PHP, and then we moved, Travian like games, and then we like moved to make games like Facebook games. I made like music trivia stuff and like very stereotypical farming games and stuff like that. So, uh, so that was a bit of a fun time.
How?
And then
When was this? Like, how old were you? How many years did this take? Ish.
so Game Boy Advance game was 2003. This then I worked at another company 2005 2008.
Okay.
So 2009, 2008, 2009, I was writing these comics
Cool.
and these kind of things. Uh, and then I think around that time, how old was I? I think 25, 26, I think, something like that. Um, and around that time, there was this Saudi investor who went to Japan and signed a deal with Atlas.
Hmm.
Atlas had a parent company called Index Holdings, and they owned several companies, including Atlas. And his deal was with those guys that they will send in programmers and artists um, from Japan, and they will teach in the university in Saudi Arabia to help people kind of like learn more about game making. And then whatever game they made, they can also keep. So they still work on making video games, but they teach once or twice a week. And then whatever game they end up making, also they get to keep as well. And they get to do a lot of work. So the guy that the studio manager was also Japanese that came with the rest of the team. Um, Thought that it would be, since I have a full team here, that I've moved with me from Japan, but all we need is a game designer. And they were like, let's look for someone in the local market that can understand the local taste. And at the time, that was pretty. I was probably one of the few people that had game design as a career. So, like, there was like at the game designer with like 6 years of experience or something like this. And so it was very easy to find. And then, like, the guy, I was in the first interview, the guy said hi, and I just replied in Japanese. So he was like, what are the odds that the only game designer we find in the region also happens to speak Japanese? So they just hired me. They hired me on the spot.
So this was
Uh,
basically like, again, like, so sort of as you had this, the dream coming true from the kindergarten.
See,
Crazy.
it's kind of like working all together and just kind of like, you do the work, you put yourself in the right time at the right place, I guess, if you can. And the rest, there's so much luck and chance and all of that stuff. You put in the work, and then you never know when the opportunity comes into place. Like I would have never have thought that Atlas would have come to the Middle East and they want to work on, and then I will end up working with a team that's working on Persona. I wouldn't have, my imagination wouldn't have been wild to put it together. But I was like, I want to make games, so I'm gonna build a career in games in whatever way I can. And I want to go to Japan, so I'm learning Japanese. And you do the work, an opportunity happens, you might get lucky.
Cool. Okay, then what's next?
So eventually, I was in talks with Gameloft, who were thinking about starting a studio in Singapore. But and then I was like, but I'm busy with working with the guys in Atlas right now, so I'm not going to do that. But then I got back in touch with them. I was like, is the Singapore thing still going on? Because I think like the contract with the Saudi government was kind of near ramping up, and I wanted to see what I wanted to do. And they were like, no, we're not doing Singapore anymore, but we're starting a studio in New Zealand. Would you like to come? I was like, yes. And then I looked up where New Zealand was on the map. I kind of like had a very different idea of where New Zealand was. But yeah, a couple of weeks later, I was packing my bags
Was
and
was this a
sold
difficult
everything I owned.
decision?
Is
Like,
that?
if was it a difficult decision to make? Like, because like that's quite a life changing decision that you're like again like looking at the map and then seeing, oh wow, this is like somewhere where nothing else is close.
Yeah. Australia is pretty close. It's like a 3-hour flight. Um, but yeah, I think at the time I thought to myself, and I was like, well, the worst thing that could happen that I don't like it is that I'll somehow figure out a way to get a plane ticket and fly back.
Yeah.
I was like, what's the worst that can happen? And I've always wanted, like up until that point, like I was either the only game designer on the team, or like in an indie team where I was like the only game designer, or like one of the guy that trained all the other game designers. So I've never worked in a professional experience, so like I had a lot of self-doubt, and I was like, am I actually a good designer? Do I know what I'm doing? Because at the time, sometimes I still think that till this day, like, do I really know what I'm doing? um, how do I measure up against the pros, you know is what I thought. Because I had no way to verify. I've never met another game designer in my life. I didn't get the opportunity to travel and see them and all of that. And when I did see them in like GDC or stuff like that, I was super intimidated and didn't know that I had the chops or knew what I was talking about most of the time. So for me, I was like, I just an opportunity for me to work at a big company. They work on IPs. Um, they speak English, so I can like fit in. And it's in a professional working environment. So I was like, yeah, what the hell? Let's pack up and go. And if it doesn't work, I pack up and come back.
So this was your first big trip. As a spoiler for the listeners, because I know, of course, but you're like traveling basically ever since, right?
Yeah, I mean, like to some extent, like the other day, I thought about it. My entire childhood, I've been traveling. Because like even when I was a kid, my dad worked in pharmaceutical companies, and he was traveling a lot. So in my childhood, like I was between Jordan and Saudi Arabia. Every 3 to 4 years, I was in a different city. So I guess to some extent, it was in my DNA. And then when I got the opportunity to start traveling, that trend continued to go. So by the time I landed in New Zealand, it was my third country. And as we speak today, I'm on country number 8 that I live in. So so that list kept on going since.
So how
Yeah.
was your time
Uh,
in New Zealand?
oh, I love it. New Zealand is one of my favorite places on earth. The nature is stunning. The people are so friendly. I made lifelong friends. Some I went back and visited this past Christmas, and we spent some time together. Lifelong friends. My chosen family is how I like to call them. There's something about like being stuck on a rock in the middle of the Pacific that can kind of create some very intense bonds.
Like I always
Yeah.
like have this contrast to Australia, where like everything is trying to kill you, and New Zealand is super safe, right? There's
No, not at
nothing.
all. There's like birds and sheep. There's more sheep than people. There's like 50 sheep for every person, I think. Um,
Which
yeah,
can be dangerous at some point. Just saying.
I haven't had any hazards with sheep, that's for sure. But yeah, no snakes. Uh, one really annoying tiny spider, but that's about it. Like none of those big, hairy, scary ones that you have in Australia. Yeah, no, New Zealand is a beautiful, beautiful place. I spent I don't know 3.5 years over there. Loved it. Enjoyed it immensely. We worked on a bunch of games. Were game tie-ins. Worked on games for like Hasbro, made My Little Pony, Littlest Pet Shop, stuff like that. Worked on games for like Universal. So we worked on a game tie-in for Despicable Me 2 called Minion Rush.
Oh.
We did some games for Marvel. We did pitches for like Spider-Man games and stuff like that.
And you
So it's
always
cool,
had
like
this design role, like I think like principal designer or.
exactly. So I was a principal game designer of the studio. So I was like basically setting the standards for the craft as a game designer. We were around 18 designers as well. So they were all kind of like in my team. And I was like the one that's kind of mentoring them and helping people grow and also get to work as a lead on a lot of the projects that we shipped. So So yeah, I had my hand in a lot of pies, which I tend to enjoy. I led several projects, and a lot of them ended up being quite successful, which was really good for the studio. We grew from like 50 to 250 people, and we got to do more and more stuff. Really fun time. We were like, our office was not that far from the ocean. So I remember like beautiful sunny days. You go out for a dip during lunch break, and you come back for work. It's
Being close to the sea is something. This is something like I'm super happy in Austria and always close to the mountains, but I tend to miss the sea. So
yeah, I love this as well.
I noticed that like all around the world, there's just a few countries actually which don't have any access to sea, and Austria is one of them.
Jordan has very limited access to the sea as well, which is why I think ever since I left, I've been always trying to live close to the sea if I can. It's very magical to be around it and all of that.
So what's next?
Yeah, so when I was in New Zealand, I signed an offer with a company in the UK actually, and I was gonna move to the UK to work there. But I was like, before I go to the other side of the world, maybe since I'm close by, maybe I should go and visit Japan again. I've visited multiple times, but it was close enough to New Zealand. I was like, all right, while these guys are doing my paperwork, I'm gonna travel to Japan and visit. And while I was in Japan, I ran into some old friends. We had dinner together. They invited me over to their company. We were walking around. And then, during my visit to that company, I met the boss, and the boss made me an offer.
Offer you could not resist.
They made me an offer. That was definitely one of the ones I couldn't resist. Like that was the dream. It happened. So yeah, I was there on vacation. I like even in that like I wasn't prepared for an interview at all. I was in full vacation mode, like shorts, Hawaiian shirt, the works. And the dude made me an offer. So went back to New Zealand, packed my bags. 4 weeks later, I was in Tokyo.
Crazy. So what
I
did
was
you
a,
work on there? How was
I was
your
a creative director for a company called Inish, which is an independent studio that did a lot of code development with Square Enix and a lot of other Japanese studios. We did mostly turn-based JRPGs and stuff like that.
your dream?
Uh, Another one, like I worked on Persona to start, but then like ended up working with a bunch of these. And those games were for the Japanese market only. So, and they were on smartphones, and some of them were all supported on PlayStation Vita, which was more popular in Japan than the rest of the world.
Maybe we can talk later a little bit about the difference, because like I just when you say they were only designed for the Japanese market, this would be quite interesting to briefly talk about the differences. Actually, I don't
Yeah.
know, because you have
Well,
some.
I can talk about it a bit now. Like,
Yeah.
some of them were like, IPs that are pretty much not that known outside of Japan,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of like, the JRPGs generally, they're hugely popular in Japan, but they're still considered to some extent a niche outside, you know. Um, so if they're not like a massive IP, they don't sell that many units. PlayStation Vita also was popular in Japan, but not that popular outside. Some of the games that I worked on were very specific to the local market. Like there's this game that I worked on called Yurokami, which was in co-development with Square Enix, and it's a character collection game. Um, and the characters each represented a different accent in Japan. So you can see, like, a game like this would be completely lost in translation
Yeah.
when we
Interesting.
port it out.
Interesting. Is there
Yeah.
like, did you like encounter any specific games where you would say, "Wow, this is such a loss that we don't have this in at the Western market"?
Like I think a lot of those types of like what I really saw that inevitably ended up making its way to the Western market maybe 5 or 6 years later. I saw that at the time the Japanese industry has really perfected live service and like the way they run live events, they done daily challenges, daily missions, something similar to the pass. Um, They ran crossover events, cross IP events, all of these things that are now normal. But back in 2015, 2016, when I came to Europe and I was talking to my companies that I worked on, I was like, we should be doing this because we're doing this in Japan. People thought I was crazy, like it wasn't a big thing yet. But back then, I thought that they cracked the code. They managed to make a game, no matter how linear or how finite it is, they managed to make it really compelling for a very long term. You know? There was like a massive game at the time called Puzzle and Dragons, which I think ended up making its way to the West, but also was not as successful. But Puzzle and Dragons, I think, was one of the top grossing games, excuse me, of all time. And it was making so much money. It was hugely popular. Everybody was playing it. But in the West, it was kind of like a bit of a niche as well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. Like there, like from a research perspective, there are like a lot of studies. We also ran some, which are actually like showing a little bit of difference. Not like very much into what people also tend to enjoy and how they
Yeah.
enjoy playing video games, and that's quite the difference in the Western and Eastern markets. So that's like it's also like there are interesting studies about the Chinese market, which is again also another different. Yeah, yeah,
That
okay.
was a big learning for me as well because, like, for us in the West, we say we are of the Western market and we have the Asian market, and we are so wrong because in Asia, like the Japanese market is very different than the Korean market. That is also very different than the Chinese market. That is also very different from the Southeast Asian market. And in fact, like when they work there, they split it into those regions. Um, and also like in Southeast Asia is also a big term that has a lot of different like subcategories within it, and there's different ways to make games. The local taste is completely different. The art style is completely different.
Yeah.
Even for somebody that is not really well versed in the region, they're like all look like anime stuff. But there's maybe subtle is not the word, but there's like big differences and how those games are operated. And in many ways, like, in Japanese games, when they're going, especially in live service, they tend to have a different service team for the country because that service needs to be very cultural,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I remember when I came to the West and I was telling my companies I work with, or when I was even doing talks about it in events, when I was saying, yeah, you should have different, packages and teams operating them in different regions, and they're like, this guy is nuts, like what is he even talking about? You mean to tell us that instead of having one team we should have five? That's crazy.
Okay, so you already spoiled. After that, you made your way to Europe.
Yes, it's a bit of a spoiler, I guess, but like Dice is in Europe, so it's not a
Yes,
big
yes, yes.
a big spoiler. But before I got there, I moved to Germany first, moved to Berlin,
Oh, okay.
where I worked at King.
Okay, right, right.
uh,
Yes. When
yeah,
was this? This was
this was 2016.
16. How
Yeah.
this
How
was
old
like
is it?
King is also quite a big company. This was like also the time when Candy Crush was like super popular and like they
And because it's huge, it still is
it's
huge. But
still
2016, like actually between me moving from Japan to Germany, I signed a King contract, and during that time, King was bought by Activision Blizzard.
this was the time, right?
So by the time I landed in Germany, I was an employee of Activision Blizzard, uh, which was very cool. I was heading up design and production on a lot of games in the Candy Crush franchise, which was really cool. But also because we became under the Activision Blizzard companies. I was traveling a lot to the US and working with the guys on Blizzard and Activision, and we talked a lot about shared methodologies and stuff like that. So it was a very interesting period of my life. I moved to Europe. Like the one thing that is, you hear a lot about the working in Asia and in Japan that is absolutely true is that you work a lot. Like working very long hours. Sometimes 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, something like this. I had 7 teams in my studio that I was looking after, so I was like, working a lot. Um, and it's a big part of the reason why I wanted to move to Europe, you
Mm.
know. And then as I moved to Germany, I had like and at King especially, I had amazing work-life balance. So suddenly I had like the whole evening for myself. I was like, oh, look at all this free time.
Crazy.
Um, and
Because
that
like
was
also Germany is not known to be like they also have quite strict office hours usually and are very like
yeah.
focused. So that this must be quite a contrast though still
It
to
was incredible. Actually, my boss at King at the time was an Austrian guy, and then and in the first week, I used to come to him. I was like, you know, I'm still like in my Japanese mentality. I go like, you know, my furniture is gonna arrive on this day at 9 o'clock, so I'm gonna be away for an hour to to clear customs, and I'll be back and blah blah blah. And he's like, yeah, Fauzi, whatever. And then and then like I come back, I was like, yeah, I need to go to like the IKEA delivery, insist on me being at home. And he's like, look, Fuzzy, you're not in Japan. Just don't bother me with this stuff. Whenever you, you can come whenever you want to come.
yeah, that's quite a difference. I mean, like I don't know, like the work life. It's just like what I heard in from Japan, but amazing.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more intense. Like, you know, it's very hierarchical. Like I can't just like not show up or like, you know, waiting at home because I'm waiting for a package or something like that. All of these things were like unheard of for me.
How many
So
work like hours a week would you work in Japan?
you know, like I was doing between 10 to 12 hours a day a lot of the times, 5, 6 days a week minimum. If we're launching games, there goes my Sundays, you know.
Is there no like legal restrictions?
There's, you know, like I think so nobody ever forced me to do this, but
Mm.
it's kind of cultural, you know.
Mm.
And it when if I'm not doing it, especially as like the boss, it
Okay.
kind of feels like I'm letting my team down,
Wow. Okay.
you know. So like there's this yeah, I always felt like I was guilt tripped, you
I
know,
see. Yeah.
guilt tripped into doing overtime. But yeah, I don't regret it. It was really a bonding experience, I guess, with my team. I learned a lot. Yeah, one of the most profound experiences I've ever had, which is definitely fascinating. But yeah, going back to Germany, I had all this free time, so I was like, I ended up writing my first book, which
Because you
came
all of a
out.
sudden had so much, you could finally also work on other projects in the evening on
Exactly.
weekends.
In the evening, on a weekend, I have all this free time.
This
Yeah,
makes so
so
much sense now. So that because you grew up with the Japanese working mentality, that's okay. No,
yeah.
so and your first book was a game design book, right?
Yes, it's called الخلاب في فن تصميم الألعاب or الخلاب in art of game design. It came out in 2018, and it was basically the first book to be written about game design in Arabic
Mm.
ever. So it's a big reason of why I wrote it is because like after I've done this like mini tour and I've worked with professional game designers at this point, I felt like I can give back, you know. And you know, when I was starting out, I was trying to get my hand on whatever book I could get my hands on, especially in English. You know, my mom's an English teacher. I grew up speaking English, so it wasn't a problem. But not everybody, you know, has that privilege.
Mm.
And yeah, I just wanted for people to have you know, a resource about education for game design, specifically in Arabic, um, that you know wasn't there. So in 2018, I released the book, and in 2019, I also ended up releasing because I thought like maybe not everybody could buy it. So I made the content of the book available as a week long video course
Mm.
for free online as well for people who want to learn in Arabic on this non-for-profit platform that was sponsored by the Jordanian government actually, and it became yeah huge, like 15, 20,000 people in the first year like took the course, and it just continued to grow from there.
Great.
And the book also became hugely popular in the Middle East. That blew my expectations, especially that's really difficult to get because like you know delivery from Amazon to a lot of different countries was a bit hard to so I was trying my best to kind of like send copies whenever there was like a local event and stuff like that. And um, yeah.
Um, and the writing process, how did you how did you find time and motivation? Did you have any, I don't know, routines or how would you, and how long did it take? So how would you motivate yourself to write this thing and finish it, especially?
I tend to start like, in a very similar way that I do any creative endeavor. Like I break it down into high level topics.
Mm-hmm.
And then for every topic, I break it down into smaller pieces, then smaller pieces, then smaller pieces. So to give you an example, I was like, if I want to write a book about game design, what would the chapters be?
Mm-hmm.
Then I broke down the chapters of the things that I want to write about. I was like, all right, for this topic, what are the subheaders of these topics, for this chapter? And then I put them down. They were like, what are the key messages that I want for each one of those subtopics? And then I was like, all right, so for each one of those subtopics, how many paragraphs I imagine they're going to be? And then I just fill in the blanks. So, most of the work is the preparation of what are the big ticket items that I want to write about. And then that becomes, think of it as a mural board. I had an actual physical board at home at the time. And for my other books afterwards, they became a mural board. And then for the first year, I just don't write anything. I just read and open my mind to the topic. And I also start to talk to people about what I intend to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then they will start to give me ideas, even if when they don't really intend it. They're like, oh, you should do this and that, or you should write about this, or I love this about that book.
Mm-hmm.
Or have you read, Jesse Shell's book, or have you read this guy's book, or whatever. And of course, I've read a lot of these books, but I also got a bunch recommended to me. And then I would read and go like, oh, that's an interesting topic. And that becomes a sticky note in that chapter. Or that's an interesting topic. That becomes a sticky note in that chapter. So by the end of the year, that board is just filled with sticky notes. And sometimes, you wake up at night to go like, oh, that would be nice to write about. And then that becomes a sticky note. So first year, I think in even my latest book, I did the same. First year or two, I just don't write. I just let my brain cook, so to say, and I just gather information. So I'm reading everything I can get my hands on. I'm talking to people. I'm doing talks at events so we can have a dialogue.
This is smart.
And then I start to get what are the most frequent questions that I'm getting. So when I go and I teach in the Middle East, like what are the questions that I'm getting all the time? How did you get into the industry? What do I do? Blah blah blah. All right, I'm gonna write a chapter about this. What are the phases of development of a game? Like, all right, I'm gonna write a chapter about that. It starts off from epics, and then all the way down to sticky notes. And like the thing is, when I look at the sticky notes, it'll be like, write a paragraph about how you can use level design to convey a story. I can write 5 paragraphs about it. So I'm like, okay, so each one of those sticky notes becomes a paragraph. Then you have your first draft.
And how long did the writing process then take you? Another year or much faster?
Yeah, maybe 9 months.
Okay, great.
9 months I had my first draft, and then 2 to 3 months afterwards was to clean it up.
And everything basically next to your main work, whether this was, now we are with King and the next station was then Dice, right? See how smart I try to make the transition.
Yeah, so that came out 2018, 2019 was when I moved to Sweden, and I joined DICE as head of design.
How did
And
this
there
happen?
I was at like most of my other shindigs. So for King, I was headhunted, and for DICE, I was headhunted, and for UB afterwards, I was also headhunted. No, which was really cool because I've been a fan for Battlefield for a very long time, since 1942. So it's kind of crazy for me to get the opportunity to work with these guys.
And you were head of design.
I was head of design there, so I was managing all the creative directors, design directors, level designers, UX designers. The entire design craft was reporting to me, around 90 people-ish.
Wow.
and was responsible for the creative output of the entire studio, which included the live service of Star Wars Battlefront to Battlefield 5 and then Battlefield 2042.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a really fun time. Amazing people. Moved to Sweden, which I love. Um, and I think it's now the country I've lived the longest in
Sweden.
my life. Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
wow.
approaching 6 years in Sweden. So Sweden has been the country I lived in the most. Yeah, close to 6 years in Sweden.
And then with one last
Yeah,
turning
so
point, right?
then I ended up working for Ubisoft. So at first I joined the company as VP of Global Creative. So I was overseeing AAA production from a creative point of view across several European studios. And we worked on a lot of different games. So we finally shipped a game on a Nintendo console with Mario Rabbids Sparks of Hope on the Switch.
Cool.
So that was 20 years after I tried my failed Game Boy Advance game. So um, that was a really important moment because, like, finally shipped the game on a Nintendo console 20 years later, and it was a Mario game at that as well.
This was during COVID, right?
This was a bit after, so 2021 is when I joined UB. Yeah,
Oh,
so
right. Yeah.
it was the tail end of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So like
yeah.
given yes, sorry, and it's not your last path, right? This was
No,
then
no, no. So because my rabbits came out and we shipped Star Wars Outlaws with the guys in Massive. It just came out last year, and then a month later, I officially took responsibilities as creative director on Beyond Good and Evil 2 uh,
which was even like in the
in
German
France.
and Austrian TV. Like
Was it?
yeah, 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 yeah,
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I
There
remember
was
you
like
sent me a screenshot once.
this
That
was
was
nice.
funny. Um, it's so cool. I really enjoyed working with the guys here in Montpellier on Beyond Good and Evil. I was working with them from my previous role as VP of Global Creative, and we've done some really cool stuff together. And then they've asked me to come and join them and work with them full time, and I was happily accepted. So yeah, now I spend a lot of times in France, country number 8, in the south of France by the Mediterranean Sea again. And yeah, working with these guys on Good or Evil 2.
So this was like the short 50-minute overview about your tiny career path.
22 years in 50 minutes, not too bad.
And what do you think, like if you look back, what were like really shaping key moments but the kindergarten experience? I think we this certainly is something.
Um, like I always thank these guys. And so, like, every step that happened to me along the way, somebody took a chance on me. So I'm always grateful for everybody that has.
Mm, mm.
I had nothing to prove that I could do the job, and they took a chance on me, and I'm forever grateful. So the guys that asked me to come and join them write the music for the Game Boy Advance in Jordan, I'm always grateful for them. That's a big turning point. The guys at Atlas that were like, "You're the only game designer, so I guess we'll hire you and we'll get you to work with us." I'm grateful for them because they gave me a taste of working on international IPs for the first time. The guys that moved me all the way to New Zealand. Um,
This,
I've never made a smartphone game before. Like they moved me over there, and then I ended up working on some of the biggest games, most downloaded games of all time at the time. Like one of some of the games we worked on. Yeah. Then I'm always grateful for my mentor Hiromasa Iwasaki, who,
I just wanted to ask if you had any mentors, because obviously
yeah,
like people have been important for you, and
of course, many, yeah. So Hiromasa is, without a doubt, is one of the most influential personalities in my career. He was my creative director at Gameloft. He was there for a little bit of time before he moved back to Japan, and then he invited me over to come and work with him and Inish. And yeah, this guy started making games in '88. Like abandoned. He was studying to be a dentist, and then he was like, "No, but I love video games, and that's what I want to do." And it's all as he has been doing till this day. He's the guy that basically created the YS series, uh, which, like, for turn-based JRPG fans, they would recognize this name quite well. And he made so many other games. I remember, like, when I was with my colleagues in Japan, and we had like this round table once, and we were talking about what are like the most important games in our lives and stuff like that. Half of my colleagues named games that he made, you know, and he was such a humble man, still is, very funny. Has like a really funny sense of humor. Has like a father-like figure, like when he's like like he was on the board for the company that I worked in, but on a hot sunny day, he would like come to the office with like 2 bags of ice cream, and he would start to like throw ice cream around for people, you know. So yeah, we spoke a lot about design, and we were always talking about the games that we work on and how we want to improve and stuff like that. And yeah, Battlefront 1 was one of his favorite games of all time because he's a huge Star Wars fan. So when he knew that I was moving to Dice, he was very proud. And like I look up to him as well, so I was very happy that that ended up happening. Hero also ended up writing the forward for my latest book. Actually, it just came out this Christmas.
I saw that
And
we will talk about this.
yes, of course, my pleasure. Yeah, and so yeah, he's one of the people, but all of the other people I mentioned before that, I tend to always thank them whenever like I'm receiving something or I'm writing a book. I acknowledge um, that they had a profound impact on me and helping me in my career and who I ended up being as a game designer.
Um,
Really?
so this leads like to a lot of interesting like follow up question, because like again like I would be super interested what shaped you, because you just mentioned what made you the game designer you are now. Are
Mm.
there like specific what I find quite interesting, like on your journey specifically, you've been part of so many like different cultures, regions. Is this something like which also shaped your approach to game design? And
Yeah.
is
So this is probably not only shaped my approach to game design. It shaped who I am as a person. Like because I've lived in so many different countries. Like the I've seen some things that would get you killed in one culture that are totally fine in some other culture. I've seen things that like are considered very impolite in one culture that are like considered actually very polite in the other. So like the whole idea of absolutes is not something that is part of who I am. The idea of perspective and nuance is a huge part of who I am, and the importance of how we communicate, as a species is fascinating for me. Because like in my travel, I also ended up picking up and learning a bunch of languages, and also like seeing how people communicate, the different ways to communicate, but also how we are in our differences. We're still very similar. You know. So I found that always fascinating.
is this like you also had leadership roles? Is there also
Mm.
something like a lot of differences you noticed, and how did you?
Yeah. So sorry if I interrupted you there.
No, no, no. But of course, this.
I think what first like there's some stuff that are just like techniques that I guess I picked up as a leader in a lot of these different cultures, but also like how the perception of leadership is very different from one culture to another. Like there in the Middle East, like a leader is more viewed as a teacher. Like they even like you call your boss ma'allim, which literally means teacher, because like you expect your boss to be the person that knows everything, that is teaching them, that is more like a father-like figure and stuff like that, a lot more hierarchical. In a Japanese company, like the boss tends to believe and take for granted your loyalty for the company, because for most Japanese companies, you join the company from university and you're expected to stay there until you retire. um, so they believe in, if as long as you put your heart in the right place and you put the effort, you can do whatever you want to do, and they will empower you to do that work and all of this. um, but also they want to make sure that you put in the time, you put in the effort. So uh, you tend to be quite seniority driven in a Japanese company. It's like you ship a couple of games in this role. Now you're ready to move on to the next step. Then you ship another, so you earn more privileges as you get more experience and you spend time. But you see that even in like, people that learn how to make sushi, they spend 6 years learning how to make rice before they can even touch the fish. So there is that level of like craftsmanship and like growth and seniority and stuff like that, and how like the leader is paving and providing these opportunities and is patient as you're gaining that seniority, so to say.
This is like
And the West is something else entirely, as you know.
yeah, what you're saying is so interesting. Like because like again like I mean, you've always been like a leader in of creative team, or like also trying to convey the creative visions, and I think like this is like one of the most challenging tasks quite often. So, is there any like secret or any like tips to balance this creativity with actually the realities of production?
The thing is that I find is fascinating is that having been a leader for like design teams and creative teams in a lot of different places, different size teams as
Mm.
well. And throughout my journey, I was always teaching as well. So in whatever country I lived in, I also taught game design and all of this. I was interacting with a lot of students too. So, like over time, I started to see patterns in how people come up with ideas. You know, I've seen people like almost want to leave their job. They're so infatuated with the idea. They're like, all right, we're going to quit everything and develop this idea. And what they didn't know, it was like maybe the third or fourth time I got pitched that idea that same week. So I start to see that, like, regardless of the culture, the way we come up with ideas, there are patterns in how that happen. And I just happen to be in the idea business. So I started to have like all kinds of like different hypotheses and like how do we even come up with ideas and how does this even happen? And I became like, in the words of a friend of mine, he called me Fawzi is slightly obsessed with creativity in in the best possible way, I hope. And that's what inspired me to write my second book.
I think you
Uh,
already made like saw my smart transition move again.
yes, you threw the alley oop, and I wanted to dunk it, to dunk it in. Yeah, so my book is called "Demystifying Creativity on Originality in Game Development," and it comes from that. It comes from seeing, identifying how do we even come up with ideas?
Mm.
How does inspiration work? What is the neuroscience of creativity? And then basically advocate a practice I'm calling creative sobriety, which is awareness. Because if we become aware of how we come up with our ideas or how ideas form, then we can intellectually push them deeper towards originality. Then, if we can understand how we come up with ideas and become sober about it, then we can probably quickly identify if this is something that someone else can think of very quickly. And in my practice of creative sobriety that I advocate for heavily in my book, I talk about different techniques in which you can inject yourself into your ideas, because you are the only unique thing in the world. There's only one of you to some extent. So the more you can inject of yourself into the thing that you are making, the more likely you are to arriving at originality. And that's, part of the creative sobriety practice that I advocate for heavily in my teaching and now in my book.
The like just like as a small side note, like I was lucky enough to read the book already. It's I find it super inspiring and really helpful. There are so
Thank
many good points in there which are really practical actually. So like we will certainly point to the book in the show notes, the podcast notes. It's
you
yeah.
so
I wanted to have like a super smart follow up question. There was a very obvious one. All right. Yeah, because what you just mentioned, because it
Mhm.
makes so sense. Like also given your path, because your path, and what you just mentioned, like you're the person shaped by all the experiences, your travels, the cultural impacts, and like if you're able to inject this, then in your creative endeavors, of course, those will be much more eventually interesting experiences. So I find this so smart. Um, with
Thank you.
that, I would love to ask you about your other like ways to like both what actually made you as a person, whether it's my favorite questions, whether it's books or games or movies, like things that actually shaped you. Um,
Mhm.
like this would be the first part of the question, which I will would love to hear like this endless list. But the second part would be also if there are specific things you find helpful to actually get inspired. So like a two part question.
Okay.
The first one should be
So
super like lots of books, lots of movies, lots of games. No,
there's,
no pressure, right?
there's there's gonna be a bunch, so I'm gonna try to keep to not like spam people with too much information. But I feel like so the thing that shaped me a lot as a person will be first and foremost, like before the movies and the book and the music and all of this. The thing that shaped me a lot as a person was the people I met and the life journey that I've taken. You know, so the travels that I've done, being able to interact with people from all kinds of different parts of the world, and being exposed to so many different perspectives um, has really allowed me to open my mind to so many different types of thinking, you know. And I think once you're open minded to different thoughts and perspectives, then I think you can get even more and more from the books and the movies and the music you watch. I forgot who did this saying, but there's a quote I like, which is, racism doesn't survive contact, you know. So the minute you actually get in touch with the other and you get to know them and you get to talk to them and you get to understand their perspective on life, you know, um, it opens up your mind
Mm.
to understanding that maybe your way is not always the right way, and maybe just the idea of judging something of being right or wrong is not really um, practical even, you know. So that's the more like the philosophical answer to the first part of your questions. Books, I can tell you, I can break it down into maybe the top three
Mm-hmm.
that I like. Top three game design books that I love. The Art of Game Design, A Book of Lenses by Jesse Shell.
Oh, good
Monumental
one.
book. I love it. Rules of Play by my dear friend Eric Zimmerman.
Oh, I love this one
Uh,
also.
Fantastic book. And A Theory of Fun by also my other good friend Ralph Coaster,
Oh, of
and
course.
such a privilege to be able to to have met these guys because Ralph's book was actually, and I told him this when I met him. Ralph's book was the first book I've ever read on game design.
Wow.
So as I started to want to learn to be a game designer, it was the book at the time, and I managed to get my hands on it because I had a relative that was flying in from the States. Um, yeah, and Raf's book helped a lot in my initial understanding of what game design even is. You know,
It's like all three of them would be on my top list. It's really like full of information. Also, all of them like really packed. Like especially the Shell book. This is crazy. It's so packed with information.
it's so good. It's so good. It's also like the one I tell people that they should they should study. You know, like even my students, I'll be like, I'm going to teach you stuff, but you're going to learn so much more from what Jesse has written. It's a really wonderful, wonderful book.
And on a personal side, like any sci-fi or
Uh,
novels or
so
fantasy things.
oh, it's interesting because like the three other books I was going to mention were going to be nonfiction, but I can also start with the fiction books
Like give it
too.
all of them. All of them.
All of them, all of them. All right, I'll go with the books. So, some of my favorite novels of all time. One of them will be No Longer Human by Osamu Dazai.
Mm-hmm.
Very powerful fiction novel that was really, really moving for me. Um, 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. What a book! It's been a while since I've read it last, but yeah. And an important book from my childhood was War and Peace, Tolstoy. My dad made me read that because it's like, I love Tolstoy. You should read that too. And
That's
I was
quite
like,
a lot of pages for a young
does
boy.
it, like it was huge, huge book. So I guess like it was memorable for me, like as much as the story was powerful. There was also like the effort it took me to read that thing.
But you're right. Like in retrospect, actually, like if you put a lot of effort into reading, it will be something which sticks. Crazy. Yeah.
And the more I read it, the more invested I was. Like
Yeah.
especially as a kid, I was very impressionable. I was very imaginative. So like I think I was crying for a week when I read the Oliver Twist for the first time. Like my parents had to kind of like calm me down every time I saw like a beggar in the street or something like this because all I could think of was Oliver and all the bad stuff that
But
that happened to him.
that's a magical about books, but also games and movies because they really make us think of different worlds, different stories, different lives, and yeah. So again, like also every written book, if you just because like I do have this stack of book next to me, but just like if you look at them and just know every single of those books is probably years of work by one single person who again had this
Mm.
life and these many thoughts, and we just read it in a couple of hours or maybe days. um I, it, it is something incredible magical to it. It's crazy.
It's fascinating if you think about it. Like this could be like in some cases like this is like the culmination of somebody's life
Yeah.
written in a few pages that you can gain all of that knowledge in a few hours. Isn't that amazing? And what I like about books that I think you can't get from movies or other like visual mediums is that not only can you imagine things, it also, as a medium, it allows you to have your mind wander.
Mm.
So you could read a statement and then you start to ponder that statement, reflect on what that means about you and your life. It could also like remind you of something else entirely, or it could be a eureka moment that would help you solve an issue that you were facing.
Mm.
It's like in a movie, if you kind of like get distracted, you look back, you might have missed something.
Yeah.
Whereas in the book, it's there waiting for you to come back when you're ready, and I love that as a medium.
This is interesting. Yeah. Three
Mm.
non-science fiction books you also promised.
Ah, yes. So one of my favorite books is Nonviolent Communication.
Mm-hmm.
I find that book to be fascinating, and also it's so important that we pay attention to how we talk to each other against the communication thing, and how little we actually do, and how much like our words can actually hurt people without us knowing. You know,
Yeah.
the topic of awareness is very important for me, as you could probably see.
Yeah.
So this book is really up there in terms of like helping you gain that awareness. Another book that I love by a Swedish author is called Factfulness.
Yeah. Yeah. I have.
It's 10 reasons why we're wrong about the world. He also did a TED talk about this,
That's very
which is
cool.
basically saying that like how our understanding of the world is usually tends to be more negative than it actually is. He conducted this experiment in which like he had two rooms, one filled with like intellectuals, like politicians and journalists and stuff like that. And in that room, he would ask a bunch of questions, like what percentage of people do you think are illiterate in Afghanistan? Questions like this, and then he will give people like a percent, like multiple choices, and then they need to make a choice. So the first room was full of the intellectuals. The second room was chimps. So basically, they were choosing answers randomly. And almost always, the chimps were more right than the intellectuals. It's because we tend to have a skewed image of what the world is, and our understanding of the world is either archaic or driven by our need for a simple narrative. So therefore, it's just false, not factual. And in his book, he also on the topic of self-awareness, he kind of like invites people to make sure that they're check their biases and they understand if they are factual or not. You know.
Yeah.
Uh,
No, it's a. I think I read this one. What's the name of the author?
Let me get his last name proper. His Rosling.
Rosling.
Yes,
And
Hans Rosling.
like a lot of talks about bias and making us like think a little bit more about the data. Very smart book. The third
Yeah.
one.
The third one is a bit of a surprise. It's called The Relationship Cure. Which would be like, what? You're giving relationship advice on a gaming podcast? Is what you're thinking. Um, so this book is written by Dr. John Gottman,
Mhm.
which is one of the leading psychologists in couple therapy. And he's a leading psychologist because what I like about him is that he applies the scientific method in his approach to relationship therapy. So
Mm.
he literally would put couples in labs that look like apartments with cameras and stuff. And then he would observe them for like a few weeks or a month. And then he would continue to do this for 20 years. And then they get to see if those couples tend to stay together or not, you know? And then they would make observations about how those couples basically communicate and what makes their relationship successful or not. And then he made basically observations on what do successful couples do that make them stay together. And what I love about this book is because it's about communication again, and it's about it's about awareness again, is that it it showcases how small things that we do on a daily basis helps us to continue to be connected as humans, and how small things that we do on a daily basis can really push us away from each other.
So what does he recommend?
So I mean, I guess like I could try to kind of summarize one of the things he speaks about. It's something he calls a bit of connection. So, a bit of connection is like when one part of the couple is attempting to connect to the other,
Mhm.
and basically it's how that bit is received that defines the connection is successful or not. So, for example, a bit of connection would be a person the husband putting his hand on the wife's shoulder. A bit of connection could be the husband to ask her, "Would you like to watch a movie?" You know, how that bit is received can put a big part, big like a bit reaction to a big part of like how the connection is handled. So like if he put his hand on her back and she slaps it away, then that bit is rejected, or she's like, "You're annoying me." You know, it's a bit. But if she hugs him back, then that bit is received. A less obvious one, if he says, "Let's watch a movie," and the wife goes like, "I hate movies."
Hmm.
You know, that's kind of rejecting a bit. The guy is unlikely to try again to form a bit of connection. Whereas that if she says, "I'm busy right now, but how about in an hour?" You know? So if the bid, even if the bid is rejected, but it's kind of like received in a different way, it can create a very different point. Or like, I see that you're trying to connect to me and I really appreciate that, but these are my circumstances, you know? And I found that the couples that are successful, they tend to form more bids of connection per hour as those that don't.
Oh, that's nice.
You know, like over 60 to 80 bids of connection every hour. Because, like I said, there's so many different things. Like, I can get you a plate when you want to eat, or like I can ask you, like, so how are you doing? Or like, put my hand on your knee or whatever. All of these are a connection. And why I like this book, especially not only for its value in relationships, I guess, but because it applies for non-romantic ones.
Mm.
Like how many times does that someone at the workplace would reject a meeting invite and not explain why, or how many times you would talk over someone and not apologize, or how many times would you like cross someone's path and not say hi or not acknowledge that they're there, so it's very small things that makes us feel loved as people, even if we're not romantically involved, and it's essential to how we connect with each other and how we do things, and what I like about this book is that some people just do this intuitively, and for those who read it, they can also become aware, and when you become aware, you can become a better person, I believe.
This is so nice because it makes so much sense. I did not have this book on my radar. I just put it into my basket. But it really makes sense because also again where you're coming from, whether it's from your leadership perspective or whether it's about your perspective trying to understand game design. I think it certainly also can make sense to understand how to, whether it's creating stories, because obviously you are a storyteller, given everything you
We
just,
all are.
and also from I don't know if it makes sense how to connect to players eventually. But
Mhm.
it's quite a, I love this idea to get inspirations from things which might be not the most obvious ones, and
Yeah,
this is a great example. Thanks for sharing that.
it's my pleasure. If you think about it, really, like, what is a company? For a lot of people, they used to think that a company is like, an office and building and a giant logo. But then when 2020 happened, the company was still there, but we were all in our living rooms in our sweatpants. So not even the computers, like when we first started, until the computers got shipped to us, that wasn't even that. So a company is a bunch of people talking,
Yeah, yeah.
is what it is. Any organization is. Everything we do ultimately is about connection. And a big driver for all of us is that we want to be connected and we want to be accepted
What
to some extent.
what were the biggest threats? What were the biggest challenges for you as a very obviously communication driven person when COVID hit and everything went remotely?
Yeah, so not being like, I'm a flaming extrovert and I love being around people and I get a lot of energy being around people. So, so when I couldn't do that and I had to substitute it with the virtual means, it was a bit of a struggle. Um, that was probably one of the biggest ones. It's kind of like also like, especially when it comes to work and stuff like that, the sense of meaning is really difficult when like it like you're losing the value of having everybody be together, because if you think about like the most important moments in your life, or like in most people's lives, weddings, graduations, um, releases, celebrations, launch parties, all of that, they require people to be in the same spot in the time and place. They have to like let go of doing anything else and be there, present. And sometimes they even require you to wear a specific outfit, to be to be part of the ceremony in which like everybody goes place. But like basically you're in that time and place. We go like, all right, I'm not doing anything else but be here.
Mm,
All these other people are also doing the same. So this is important, right?
mm,
And when you lose that sense of presence, it kind of like you also lose a bit of that connection with the importance of what you do, which is I can understand why a lot of people ended up wanting to quit their jobs, during 2020 and 2021, because they were like, why is this important again? I kind of forgot,
yeah, yeah. Back to books and games. What is music in your life?
Music is a big part of my life. So, I played. I used to play in a in an average band when I was growing up. You know, we played gigs and bars and stuff like that, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
What did you play?
I
The
did.
guitar or like
I
what?
played guitar. Yeah, I learned the piano when I was a kid, but I was like, I'm not gonna serenade the ladies with Final Fantasy music on the piano, and I wanted to be a rock and roll guy, and stuff
I
like that.
feel triggered. I feel
Who'd have thought? Probably Final Fantasy music actually works. But I just like got drawn to the rock and roll lifestyle, and I wanted a musical instrument that I can carry around everywhere and all of that, and start playing guitar and rock music and stuff like that.
I don't know if I'm allowed to mention this in the podcast, but there's also a visual element to you, which is very like a little bit rock and rollish. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Can we talk about this, or is it like
Yeah, I think you can. It's about my face. It's all over the internet, I guess.
the tattoos? Obviously,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah. So
yeah,
like you have like tons of tattoos.
yeah,
Like I think with a special meanings. Can we talk about this like 30
yeah, yeah. We can.
seconds? Because like I'm always super excited about tattoos.
Of course, we can. Yeah. I uh, I guess like what ended up becoming, I started to get a tattoo pretty much from every country I've lived in. So, and I wanted to get a tattoo that is representative of that culture, but also representative of my time there. And I tend to want to pick something that is traditional to that culture as well. Like because that's been there for sometimes hundreds of years, and I wanted it to be so it's not going to go out of fashion or anything like this. It's not a fad, you know. Um, and yeah, I wanted it to be. It's kind of like a history of me on me, so to say.
It's again like I just wanted to because I'm super like I love this story. I love this connection that you have like those
Oh,
personal
thank you.
connections to all of those tattoos. So that's why I thought it's really tells a little bit of this also this story you actually like told us now today
Yeah.
with
So
your
it's a bit
journey.
of it as well. I
Mm,
tend to also be drawn to freehand tattoos. So a lot of the tattoos I have as well, they're not like pre-designed. A lot of the times, like I would find an artist. I would spend a lot of time finding the artist that I want to work with,
cool.
and I would have a general idea about some of the things that I want. But most of the time, he would draw directly on my skin with some of the aspects. So a lot of the times, I walk into the shop, I'm not really sure what I'm getting, and I tend to get like really big pieces. So like it's usually dozens of hours being under the needle. But what I like about the freehand style, first of all, it's completely unique to myself. And second of all, because the artist draws directly on the canvas, then it flows with my muscle structure
Mm,
and
that's
bone
nice.
structure and like, where it is. It's made for it because it drew directly or she drew directly on me
Cool.
and then did the freehand directly. And every one of them also like with the artists that I work with, they tend to be a bit of a bonding experience, so to say. So we get to know a lot about each other, and we infuse he or she would infuse a lot of what they got out of my story into the thing they're making too. You know?
This is nice. This is something which I also find always important. Like it's not only like the two you're getting, but also like for me, it's sort of the person who made it. This is something which
100%.
um so we are already a little bit like over time, I guess. I don't know like if you're still up for this, but
I'm up for it. I mean, let's go. If
great.
your listeners are up for it, I'm up for it.
I think they will love this. I'm like I find this super inspiring. I would love to hear a little bit about like your habits and routines,
Uh-huh.
because there's one thing which I still need to add. You also do
Yeah.
sports, of course. This is
Yes.
like you do tons of things. And is there like also like sports, if I may add this, it's also something which is part of your life. So
Yeah.
do you have any specific habits, routines? How do you juggle all of this? How does your life look like? How does your day look like, or a week?
So growing up, I used to be into a lot of team sports. So I played a lot of basketball when I was in high school and university, and then like especially in junior high, I was hoping that I would continue to grow, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. All my friends continued to be much taller, and I stopped. And then I was like, why do I pick basketball? Kept getting dunked on for a while, but I really enjoyed the sport, and I still watch basketball, and I'm into it. I played squash for a while after that, which is not a height advantage game, I guess, a bit maybe, which I quite enjoyed. But like now I'm trying to, and I did a bit of skating as well because I enjoy skateboarding as well. But now I tend to want to avoid injuries because, like as a skating injury, like I used to recover within a few days. Now it's probably gonna take a few weeks to a month for me to be able to recover. So I tend to just try to do non-contact sports if I can. So I just hit the gym for a workout 3 to 4 times a week if I can. Do running 2 to 3 times as well if I can too. Well, if it's available, I'd love to swim, but it's a bit more work, and it all comes to the timing. So generally, like for sports, I tend to dedicate my lunch break.
Mm, I see.
So instead of like spending an hour going with my colleagues to a restaurant or something like this, I do a 45-minute workout, and then I grab the food and I eat it on my desk during my meeting after work. And then I would go to the gym once in the weekend, so that I will hit my 4-time mark. And the beautiful thing about the gym or running is that you can do it even while you're traveling. So I tend to pick hotels that have a gym, or if I'm staying in a place, there'll be a gym nearby. And because I tend to travel a lot as part of my life, I there's no exception. Like even if I'm in Rome for the first time for 4 days, I will still go to the gym one of those days. Like I try to keep that routine happening, so I kind of like stay in shape.
Because
But it's not just staying in shape, but also I feel like it really helps in like dealing with. It helps me in doing all these other things, like dealing with stress and like getting a lot of that energy out. I always say that I never leave the gym feeling worse than going in,
mm,
you know, and that always helps. So whenever like especially if I have a stressful day at work, I make sure that I go to the gym that day. You get a lot of like stuff out. And the beautiful thing is that during the gym is also a time in which I could listen to a book or listen to a podcast, or like in the minute and a half between reps, I can send at least 2 emails. So it's it's kind of like my place where I can uh, get some sports in, but also get some stuff done at the same time.
cool. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing this. Because again, for me, it's such an important part of my life to keep my
Yeah.
head sort of like still working, to be honest. And that's why, like, I find it always inspiring to see that people who are obvious, like, because sometimes you see so little of people who are like for like in public. You always see the credits, the projects they've worked on, and so forth. So everything is work, 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 and sometimes you sort of miss like a little bit the like more private side was actually shaping them and can be helpful. I find it helpful to also know and maybe show that people who are like successful do have private
Yeah.
life, do have sports or hobbies where they draw inspiration from to actually be capable of doing their cool stuff at work also.
That's a really important message. And you know what? Like, after Japan, I was like, I'm never gonna work this hard if I can help it. So I tend to generally not work long hours, and I have a cutoff time in which, like, after this, I'm gonna stop working. I like to socialize quite a bit, so usually every evening I am doing something. Socializing, meeting up with friends. I love food. And I think this is one of the biggest motivations of why I work out, because I want to get to eat as much as I want, or like as many varieties as I want. So I work out so I can, like like yesterday I was like, I'm gonna have a salad for lunch and have a big workout because I want to have pizza for dinner. And like
Ah,
yesterday I went out to the friends to a really nice pizzeria and I had like a really big pizza. And I was like, I earned this. I did the work beforehand. Yeah.
The very like the last topic thingy which I have to sort of ask, and because you've been with so many companies, like especially like the AAA companies,
Mhm.
whether it's Dice, EA, Ubisoft, Activision, Blizzard, whether like so like you have a very good overview of the different cultures of the different and we all sort of know, and this is like a little bit of a time. Like I think everything which covered was very pretty much super timeless. But at the moment, we are in 2025. Um,
Yes, we are.
yeah, just double checked. Um,
For people who are just listening to this, Joey just looked at her watch to make sure that
it
it's
was a tough
2027.
start of the year, to be honest. So I
Fair
just
enough.
wanted to make sure we're on the same page. Um, but it is at the moment like a little bit is a very tough time for the industry, and
Yeah,
you are certainly like one of the industry veterans who have a good overview, because we tend to hear we have been there have been not so good times, it's sort of a circle. But again, also like to many people I spoke to and also the experience I have, it does not feel super well compared to other time. I would just love to hear your train of thought, whether like about the things that happened, or like a little bit what is your thoughts about the current state, or what is going on also future wise. The small
yeah.
question to the end, right?
It is a bit of a, yeah, maybe not a big. I'm gonna try to have an optimistic end to it, but maybe like we need to look at what it is at the beginning.
Mm.
So I think it's not just like the 2025, 24, and 23 has been a very, very difficult few years for the industry. And I don't think it's just the one reason. It's a lot of different reasons that has come together. There's macroeconomic reasons, like there was the recession and the inflation that came with it, that has caused big problems, especially in people's capabilities to buy games. Generally, disposable income became quite less around the world. With the raising interest rates and all of that stuff. That's a big factor. Another big factor is that there was the COVID mixed signals that a lot of the companies got. So, like, the industry grew so much because everybody was at home and a lot of people started playing video games. They were like, all right, so these people are going to probably continue to play video games. So let's now hire a lot more people so that we can grow our businesses to keep up with this current growth trajectory. Which turned out not to be the case because once COVID is ended, people wanted to get out of the house as much as possible and maybe not play as many games. Um, um, the the third thing I believe is that we have been the like one way to say it is the fierce competition. So with the democratization of games, so many people are making games. So many different companies are making games of different sizes, and we're all competing for the same user base. Like we used to over the decades, we were growing the user base of people that are playing games exponentially, but now we've gotten to a point in which like we're not growing those people that much anymore. So it's the same group of people. So that means that whoever's making games are fighting for the eyeballs and the purchasing of the wallets, basically, of the same people. So that means I need to get you to stop playing this game to play mine or something like that. So that will obviously create a very harsh and tough working and market for games generally. The fourth part is I think that we as an industry we kind of created a problem for ourselves is that we have undervalued games from a pricing point of view. You know, we kept on slashing the pricing of games down and offering them for free to a rate that there's already way more people that are making games than ever before. There's way more output of games than ever before, and they are cheaper to get than ever before. So, and we are now competing also with like TikTok and all these other things that are fighting for people's attention, So something has got to give, you know. Eventually, you go like, all right, so the market base is not growing. The users are overwhelmed with options. Options are cheaper than ever before, and we created a consumer behavior of like just wait for it to be free or wait for the sale, uh, because these games are not worth the full price
Mm.
unless they are the game that you feel like you're going to miss out on the zeitgeist to get. Those are the games that tend to sell for full price, whereas like a lot of the other games tend to suffer because of it. There's also, the popularization of games as a service. So like the players will be like they buy the game and now they're in that game's ecosystem for years, so they're less likely to play or to move to other games. And as I mentioned, because the size of the market has been the same, so if you have another live service game, so your best bet is to try to get them to leave that game to come to yours,
Mm.
or something of the sort, or in the best of the world, be able to play both. There's only so many people in the world that play games, and there's only so many hours in the day,
Mm.
and there's only so much money that they can spend if they know that they can buy all these other games for free. So ultimately, with the recession, with the macroeconomics, with the overhiring, with all of that combined, something's got to give,
Yeah.
you know? And unfortunately, that meant a lot of, really negative impact on the industry. With since 23, we've like the industry's been breaking records in number of layoffs. So every year is breaking the records of the year before that, which is a very scary trend, if you ask me. And the number of game services either shutting down or games being canceled, or major releases that would have normally have done okay that just underperform, which also caused their companies to close studios or close departments or cancel projects or have some kind of a reaction. So again, I wish I could say that it was this one thing. I wish I could point out to one evil villain that is the main reason. But if there's a common trend, I hope that we've had from the conversation that we've had today is that there's so much nuance,
Mm.
and there's a lot of things that has happened that has caused this. Um, so in our economic structure, unfortunately, when something is got to give, it has to self-correct, and its self-correct is going to do a few things. Then the industry is going to move towards what makes a lot more sense, which is maybe lowering the budgets of the projects that we make, taking more calculated bets, the success of probably a much more smaller games, and the large big games. Those are kind of like the GTAs, the FIFAs, the Pokemons. Those are kind of like have their own reserved space. But if you want to carve your place now, I think this is one of the positive trends, is that now you're going to need to cater a lot more towards innovation,
Mm.
because what's going to drive people to cough up that money, or like to move towards getting out of this negative spending habit, is for them to be really excited by something that is truly unique or they haven't seen before, that is worth their money. So, and I guess on a positive trend, um, this dire circumstances is gonna challenge our creativity like never before.
This is very positive. This is very, very beautiful, and actually it fits so well. Like, actually, my last thing would have been to ask you if there is any advice nowadays for aspiring game designers. But I think you just sort of like self answered your question already, which I
Driving towards this, like ultimately we need to be like, I believe that creativity is existential to our species, not just to us as an industry, but it's definitely now existential to our industry. And creativity is stands on the column of originality, which is like for us to present something that is unprecedented, that is new, that is fresh, that is unique. And originality comes a lot from authenticity, from us being authentic to ourselves, who we are as people, and how we can integrate our personal life journey, our views of the world to connect to others through the games we make.
Perfect. Perfect. This is the perfect ending. This is the final perfect words of wisdom. Thank you so much. This was
My
so
pleasure.
inspiring. This was like also so transparent, and I think gives so many people so many interesting, also very authentic actually insights of how such a path
Thank you.
can go. Where can listeners follow your work? Where can they buy the book? Where can they follow your work? Learn more about you.
Cool. You can find all of my shenanigans on my website. It's Fawzi.zone. That's FAWZI.zone. And I use that as my handle on anything. So you can find me on Blue Sky at Fawzi.zone. You can also find me on LinkedIn, Fawzi Mesmar. You can find me over there. My book is available everywhere. So if you are on Apple Books or Google Books or Amazon, if you search for Demystifying Creativity on Originality on Game Design, you should find that. If that's a mouthful, which it is, you can just search for my name and you should be able to find those books over there. They're in paperback and in ebook, so you can read it on whatever thing you want. And hopefully soon, end of the year, it'll come out around October. It will come out in audiobook format, and I'm working on making it available in other languages. So
Because
yeah,
you're bored
hopefully,
again.
hopefully I want to get like the knowledge available to as many people as possible. So I want to also do the talk about a lot of the content of the book in GDC and also in a lot of the gaming events that I'm going to be around. So if I happen to be in your town, drop by, and maybe you'll save yourself a few bucks of the price of the copy, and we'll get to talk about creativity.
I would need to ask you now, what is now your next super secret side project of the 1,000 projects you're going to work on? But I just hope we will have a follow up onto this one. I still have so many questions on this list, but it has been so inspiring. Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
having
much.
so much time.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. Thank you. And next one, I started writing it. It's hopefully going to be a graphic novel. So
Yes.
let's see if if I finish it together. I started writing it on the flight back from New Zealand, actually.
And a
So
music project. Where do we see your
um,
songs then?
I have an album on that stack of side projects, but the thing is, like, I only take one project at a time. The rule I set to myself is that I only pick another project once I finish the first one.
Mm.
So now that I've published my first book, I can finally start working on this graphic novel that I've been thinking about for like 4 years. After that's done, maybe I could start working on the album.
All the best. I cannot wait.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All the links will be in the show notes, and like if you're watching it on YouTube down below. And thanks so much again.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.